could, and taking pictures as much as we could. We took lots of pictures both on the field and in the morgue as well. Once we got the bodies numbered and then marked by the coordinates, they were then removed by the air guard personnel and taken to the refrigerated trucks at the temporary morgue. We removed 53 bodies from the field by noon. The victims who were on the field, their injuries were severe trauma, just tremendous force injuries, broken bones, chest injuries, head injuries, neck injuries. That was 53 people. The 47 people who were in the aircraft were almost all burn injuries or smoke inhalation injuries. It was divided almost half and half. And then, of course, we had 10 persons that died in the hospitals that we ended up, before we had closed the morgue down, and those also were evaluated. There was a good reason why they picked the morgue. We had concrete floors with drains, the ventilation, we opened up doors on both ends. So the temporary morgue was not a morgue, it was not made to be a morgue, but it was ideal. The disaster committee planned well. So once the bodies had their total body x-rays and then moved to the dental x-ray area, they went through that process. Then they went on to the fingerprinting area. All the FBI from around the area and the region handled that aspect of it. And I must say that once the body entered our identification area, they were given a person, a volunteer with a file that was not to leave that body as it traveled through this whole process. We wanted to make sure we did not lose the file or get bodies mixed up in the process. And that was key to our organization. We called them trackers, and they did an excellent job in making sure that no one else got a hold of that file. We had a lot of people demanding that information at various times, the dentist, the medical examiner, or just United Airline people or whoever. We wanted to make sure, and they were charged, only a few people could have access to that file. And that turned out to be very critical in many cases. We had to rely on a lot of volunteers who were not used to seeing this type of trauma. We're not used to seeing the autopsy. We're not used to seeing the methods needed for positive identification, the dental aspect, the fingerprinting aspect. And in some cases, jaws have to be removed, and in some cases, fingertips have to be removed because of the burning, the decomposition, the mutilation. They have to inject, for instance, the fingertips to get good fingerprints. So a lot of individuals, including funeral directors, are not used to this type of standard forensic procedures, and it was shocking. And of course, questions are raised as to the necessity of doing this, and that was an issue we had to deal with pretty strongly. And it was something that we didn't anticipate, because we're, as forensic pathologists, and as pathologists, we know we have to do, but as volunteers who are not used to dealing and seeing this type of injury, this type of catastrophe, I had a difficult time in understanding. I would say that if I had to do it over again, I would say we had to sit down with these volunteers and say, this is what you may expect, this is why we are doing it. It may seem extraordinary, but it is necessary. And as soon as we got the autopsies done, they were moved across the aisle to the morticians, to the funeral directors, and they were immediately embalmed. And again, the trackers were with these people the whole time.
There was a lot of paperwork to be done, and we had a staff of funeral directors' wives, funeral directors' mothers, anyone who would be familiar with the technicalities of death certificates, burial permits, transit permits, cremation permits, all the necessary things that had to be done before that body could go out. So, and those things all had to be produced and then double-checked last minute and put with the shipping papers and sent out then to the casketing area. In some instances where there were burn cases, they went into what's called a Ziegler case, which is a metal insert, which is sealed and put inside the casket. And in this instance, we use sealed caskets also. So those bodies were double sealed. And then they were placed in the shipping case and the shipping papers put on. From that time on, it was a matter of scheduling, either flying out of Sioux City or being transported to Omaha or Sioux Falls by hearse, and then out by plane.
The area where the accident took place was in a secure area of the airport. We have very strict guidelines that we must comply with the Federal Aviation Administration, both from the aspect of safety and security. It became extremely critical during this incident to isolate the area and secure it from a safety factor. First of all, we needed to carry out the rescue effort, and if we had opened it up to the public, it would have hampered that task considerably. At that point, it then becomes a matter of preserving the wreckage. Again, we did not want the public in that area and felt like it was very critical that the area remained secure until the accident investigation was completed.
One of the security problems you have, you're dealing with a lot of agencies you've never dealt with before. A lot of federal agencies, you don't know what their identifications look like. Sometimes you're not sure who should be there or what authority they have when they arrive at that scene. We've had several people try to sneak press people in with them. They'd show their pass and this person's with us and they wouldn't have it. One of the things we went to for quick identification on the scene was use of ribbons, which we changed each day. This gave us a visual thing that we could see if the person had been checked. It was not the identification to let a person in the gate per se. Every person, whether they had it or not, were still checked each time they came through the gate. And the reason for that, it'd be quite easy for them to take the ribbon off and pass it to somebody else. One of the things we would probably improve in the future is I think we should have a special disaster ID card that we have preset. And we can even get cameras to take pictures at the scene if we have to. Now these cards could be color coded, so you'd have quick visual to know what areas that person would have access to the scene. Whether they could just come in and help with the food service, or whether they're going to go out into the accident scene itself and mark evidence. This would be one of the things which I'd say I do that we didn't have at this time, maybe we weren't prepared for. We found out that later that night, again, as the bodies come off and we attempted to secure, we also put a security net on the inside. Around the wreckage itself, that was quite difficult for two reasons. One, the amount of distance which it covered, I'd say over 1.5 miles of debris, and the cover for the people of the cornfields. And some of the cornfields were right up in with the wreckage, so we had to put people almost directly on those particular pieces. We thought originally we'd get by with maybe 20, 22 people on the inside perimeter. We had to go up to over 40 people to secure that.
I was asked to participate in the disaster planning team because of my role as a mental health professional in the community. The specific areas that I was to address were to be the debriefing of some of the first responders and to provide therapy for some of the families or victims of a severe crisis. The debriefing is to prevent whoever from stuffing or internalizing horror. It's to keep it out, it's to say this is horror, this is a horrible thing, and then to say these are appropriate kinds of emotional responses to horror. If these things occur, does not mean you're going nuts, does not mean that you are weak-willed or gullible, does not mean that you're a pansy. This means only that your personality is responding to horror in this way. This is a horrible situation. For your body not to respond to horror is not normal. Okay? You have to have some kind of emotional response. The best debriefing occurs as a unit. That if you're in a military unit, that you go out, you come in, and you debrief. That if you're an EMT unit, you go out, you come in, you're debriefed. If they were not a part of a unit, they don't need to be debriefed as a part of a unit. The public debriefings are important because this affects communities beyond people involved. It was over the news that the plane missed the mall by about 50 feet. The next day you could have shot a cannon through that mall and it wasn't going to hit anybody. Okay? That mall was virtually empty. Okay? Now the entire community stayed away from that mall. Okay? The entire community dealt with it. However, and the first way, of course, is to avoid. You know, one of the first things we know about post-traumatic stress is you avoid reminders. Okay. Now, so there had to be a response, a public response for debriefing, not just for the first responders, not just for people with the survivors. A debriefing could occur even before the horror. Just to tell someone this is going to be a bad experience, this is what you can expect, can greatly reduce the shock. When we were debriefing, both on the scene and afterwards, we talk about talk. Talk is where you talk with someone repeatedly, someone who is concerned about you, someone who is concerned about your response and your concerns, rather than someone who is just curious about the details. So even when we were debriefing the first responders, and I met with some of the rescue squads and said, we had the wives come to the debriefings that we held later, because we wanted the wives to know that they may have to talk about this 10, 15 times. You know, it doesn't all go away talking once. It might be this much goes away each time, and it may take 10 times before this will go away. And they may need to say the same thing. That what we wanted the wives to do then was to be concerned with them about their response, how they were feeling, rather than say, gee, what was it like out there?
Well, I don't think there's any question that the disaster of this magnitude had a tremendous impact emotionally on every one of the rescue people, as well as it did not only in those that were initially involved in the rescue efforts, but even those that were working behind the scenes in many different areas and fields. Everyone has a specific way that they cope with stress, and everyone has their own way of dealing and coping with emotional trauma.
Most of the firefighters knew that our main objective was the fire in the main fuselage. Afterwards, some of our people had some problems with stress, mainly because they felt that there were some people that needed help, that maybe they could have saved someone's life by stopping and rendering assistance at that time. And so it did pose some stress problems after the fire situation was out. So we're dealing with that right now with our people. I hope it's going to eliminate itself during the next few weeks or months or whatever it takes to probably get some professional help and some people into some stress teams in to talk to our people that's faced similar situations.
So what we urge all people to do is establish peer counselors within their within their agency. It may not be necessary in an individual community for that community to set up an entire critical incident stress debriefing team headed up by psychologists who have worked in the area, but it certainly is important that every organization set up peer counselors within their organization.
If we would have relied on only the cities and counties that we had mutual aid, we wouldn't have had too many people responding to this emergency. And I don't think we could have handled it with just the people we had mutual aid with. The other counties, the state of Nebraska, the state of South Dakota, and their counties that just automatically responded because they knew we needed help. You know, that was the key to this thing too, that we had the resources. And really, that's what it all boils down to, is when it started out, we knew we had the equipment, you know, to combat the fire, but we needed the resources. We needed foam, we needed manpower, we needed self-contained breathing apparatus, and we needed water. And these people provided the resources we needed. Without them, you know, with just the people we had mutual aid with, I'm not sure we'd had enough to combat the disaster we had, the size of the disaster we had.
Can what happened here in the planning and the coordination, the cooperation, and the working together be duplicated elsewhere? I think so. You know, but it's got to be a we type of attitude, and you got to start now. You got to start before a DC-10 lands in your backyard. You got to start before the tornado comes over the bluffs and wipes out one of your neighborhoods. You got to start before the hazardous material spill happens, in the planning and the working together. You know, plans written on paper are worthless.